Hey Vlogletites, how are you doing? This video is going to be a response, really, to a response to the last video. And I also have to say that one of my big social anxieties is mispronouncing people's names. Seriously, gives me a lot of stress. I was like Googling correct pronunciations and stuff, because I'm like, I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm seeing a whole bunch of divergent pronunciations. So tell me if I'm pronouncing this right. I was listening to your response, and I'm going to assume, based on what I thought I heard, basically you take the Z and pronounce it as a J. So Kojo, maybe. Otherwise, I'm a terrible person. Names are such personal things that I feel nervous making an attempt when it's not intuitive. I appreciate a lot of the thoughts that you brought up. I guess let me start from the beginning. There's obviously people are enraged that with the Trayvon Martin case. And you used the expression that it really seems like there's been a miscarriage of justice. That's an area where I don't necessarily agree, and this could just be a semantic distinction. The justice system, at least in the United States, is not about interpreting the law, except laws that have things that use the word like reasonable and that sort of thing. Then there's some wiggle room in there. The laws in the judicial system in the United States is strictly a whether or not you violated these laws, not whether or not these laws should be or shouldn't be. The exception being if they violate the United States Constitution, but that has to be something that typically ends up working its way up to the Supreme Court. It can be declared unconstitutional at lower levels, but then it tends to get appealed all the way up there, and it becomes a big thing that you can read about on SCOTUS blog. I can certainly understand the point that basically the idea when you look at it that someone was able to kill an unarmed teenager with a gun and not be convicted of a crime as being very problematic. But we have self-defense laws. This was not a stand your ground law, despite the fact that that's been all over the media that defense wasn't used. This was strictly presented as a case of self-defense. That being that if you perceive a credible threat to your life, then you are basically exempted from the penalties for defending yourself, up to and including killing the attacker. Now, of course, that's a whole other issue, and that's probably an even more divisive one, at least in the United States, because there are people who are very, very pro-gun, there are people who are very, very anti-gun. I tend to be very confused as to why people need guns. People who feel like they need that for self-defense, I wonder why they can't have, why they don't push for non-lethal weapons. And I would think if that were the situation, then perhaps Trayvon Martin would be incapacitated and not dead. And so I find those situations really difficult. That said, I've never been I've never felt that there was a credible threat to my life that I had to defend myself against. Perhaps if I had been mugged many, many times, I would very much understand and appreciate the laws protecting my right to defend myself. Regardless, the stand your ground law kind of goes above and beyond that. And though it wasn't used in this case, it's something that I think the United States needs to have a discussion about. But all this is to say, I don't think it was a miscarriage of justice. That given that they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was not defending himself, that you can't charge someone with a crime. And if you adopt the policy that if we think you probably did something and therefore we're going to charge you, it sets a really, really dangerous precedent for future cases. This fly is really, really excited to see you. So I think if anything, it's an indication that we have significant cultural problems and problems with our current legislation in the state of Florida on a federal level. But I don't think it's necessarily right to say that this is a failure of the justice system, because it seems like, from the testimonies that I've read, and obviously the media is so sensationalist about this, and on either side. But from the court testimony I've read, there was not substantial evidence for there to be a conviction, and that's the disappointing thing. Sometimes is that we don't have perfect knowledge, and in the absence of reasonable certainty, we have to do what is going to do the least harm to the defendant. So the other thing that you mentioned is that I have no idea. Hang on, I'm going to pause this again just because I'm now scared of this thing turning off. So I'll be right back. Okay, and I remember to hit the autofocus lock, so we're good. One of the other things that you mentioned was that I shouldn't feel necessarily discouraged from expressing my own views on this sort of thing. That in some ways it's more powerful for a white person to speak out against racism. And I can certainly see that. I know I remember there was some point, I think when I was in high school, where I was talking to my parents about how there was some school policy that I thought was ridiculous, or maybe it was some curriculum or something. And they basically said, go through it and then go back and change it, but you get you lose all credibility when you have a very vested interest in how what the situation is. So I can understand that someone who, if you are a minority and you are campaigning for the rights of your minority, it can be seen as self-interest bias. That said, I think a lot of my concern stems not from pro-equality issues, and I think it's honestly easy to be a white liberal these days, but there's a degree to which liberalism, in my personal estimation, goes a bit too far. And the problem that I have is that if I were to if I were to just suddenly decide to take an interest in campaigning for racial equality, so long as I was of the same mindset of people in that minority, it would be very much acceptable. But if I were ever to have views in the opposite direction, then it becomes much more problematic, and then it becomes almost the opposite problem of I am against a particular black issue because I am white and I have a vested interest in protecting my own personal interests. But there are things that I do have problems with. I'm at the same time I have very strong opinions on a whole bunch of different things, but I do everything I can to hold them lightly, and I'm always very, very open to having a discussion, and I love discovering that I'm wrong and changing my views on things. But I have problems with the idea of like university quotas and affirmative action. I view that as a form of tokenism, and I feel that that's not a welcome argument to make. I also, without excusing anything that my white ancestors did, I have a big problem, just in general, as a policy, with the sins of the father issue. Granted, there's a long precedent of you are responsible for what your ancestors have done, and I don't know. It's certainly true that the oppression of black people in the United States was and still to a degree is horrible and unacceptable, but at the same time, to overcompensate, I don't know if that is necessarily an appropriate thing to do, and I don't necessarily know that I personally should bear responsibility for things like slavery. But and so it's difficult for me, because I remember I was in a class at one point, and it was an English class, and there was a black professor, and she said something to the effect of, what people don't understand is that it is so much harder to be African American, because African Americans, unlike others, have to balance their African heritage with their American heritage. And that's the kind of moment that I'm talking about, where I kind of want to scream, because we all have, some sort of background. We all have ancestors. I'm Irish and German. I'm not native to America either. The experiences of my ancestors getting here were vastly preferable, but at the same time, the whole idea that only a certain group could possibly have to balance different cultures is a problem to me. But it's also the sort of thing where I feel like, well, I can't speak out in that way, and so I feel like the issue of being in the majority is one where I don't feel I'm perfectly capable and fine with taking down racist assholes, but when it comes to extremists on the other side that I may feel have gone too far, that is where I find extreme discomfort. The third thing you brought up, and this is a really interesting question because I don't know that I have an answer to it, is that the way that we improve our world is by kind of deciding what that world looks like and having discussion about it and trying to move toward it. And I think that's a challenging question. I would love to see the world be a meritocracy. But at the same time, I also don't know if that in turn is its own form of discrimination, as to whether people who are genetically predisposed to be somewhat intelligent or capable in certain ways then get privileges that are undue. But I mean, I very much would like to see equality, though I think it's hard to even figure out what that looks like, because there's so much that's still wrapped up in cultural identity. So that's an interesting question, and I'm going to have to ponder that over for quite a while. There was another point I wanted to make. It was about something about the meritocracy issue. Oh, that's the other thing, is that one of the things, at least that I've seen from the union rally, is and kind of seems to be one of the key arguments about racism, is that there is sort of this issue of black people, at least the black people who I was watching, talking about their poverty, their financial poverty, which I can understand does have a historical background, and there are sociological issues that have caused this. And I think we need to fix it, but I think we also need to make sure not to overcorrect, because that's the white knighting that I was talking about earlier, and it's patronizing. But the other concern that I have is that no matter how equal we get, there are always going to be, and unless we go with complete communism, which I think we've seen isn't really sustainable, there are always going to be some people who have it better or worse than others. I'm going to pause again. Okay, and I've got to hurry because the battery's almost dead. But there are always going to be people who have it better or worse than others, and we have to be aware that those people who do have it worse off will have an incentive to try and come up with justifications that will target our heartstrings to avoid taking personal responsibility. That there are people who will not take personal responsibility for their own actions, and so that it's that's a difficult thing, and it's maybe that'll go away when racism goes away, when all forms of discrimination go away, and someone can say, I'm poor because I'm black, or I'm poor because I'm white, or whatever, and we can say, no, you're poor because you're a lazy jerk face, and you've been given opportunities and you've thrown them away. Because there are certainly poor people who have dug their own grave, and it's certainly not, I have no idea what percentage it would be, but there is at least one, and there's at least one of every race. And so I think it makes it difficult to try and determine what effects are caused by merit alone and what are institutionalized issues. But we have to be aware that they're both factors. Anyway, those are some jumbled thoughts, and I feel like I'm digging myself a bigger hole here, maybe. We will see. I will talk to you guys soon. If you want to contribute to the discussion, love to have some more back and forths, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.